In music, modernism is a philosophical and aesthetic stance underlying the period of change and development in musical language that occurred around the turn of the 20th century, a period of diverse reactions in challenging and reinterpreting older categories of music, innovations that lead to new ways of organizing and approaching harmonic, melodic, sonic, and rhythmic aspects of music, and changes in aesthetic worldviews in close relation to the larger identifiable period of modernism in the arts of the time. The operative word most associated with it is innovation. Its leading feature is a linguistic plurality, which is to say that no one music genre ever assumed a dominant position. Inherent within musical modernism is the conviction that music is not a static phenomenon defined by timeless truths and classical principles, but rather something which is intrinsically historical and developmental. While belief in musical progress or in the principle of innovation is not new or unique to modernism, such values are particularly important within modernist aesthetic stances. Examples include the celebration of Arnold Schoenberg's rejection of tonality in chromatic post-tonal and 12-tone works and Igor Stravinsky's move away from metrical rhythm. Definitions. Musicologist Karl Dahlhaus describes modernism as an obvious point of historical discontinuity. The breakthrough of Mahler, Strauss, and Debussy implies a profound historical transformation. If we were to search for a name to convey the breakaway mood of the 1890s but without imposing a fictitious unity of style on the age, we could do worse than revert to Hermann Bahr's term modernism and speak of a stylistically open-ended modernist music extending from 1892, the beginnings of our own 20th century modern music in 1910. Eero Tarasti defines musical modernism directly in terms of the dissolution of the traditional tonality and transformation of the very foundations of tonal language, searching for new models in atonalism, polytonalism or other forms of altered tonality, which took place around the turn of the century. Daniel Albright proposes a definition of musical modernism as a testing of the limits of aesthetic construction and presents the following modernist techniques or styles: expressionism, new objectivity, hyperrealism, abstractionism, neoclassicism, neobarbarism, futurism, mythic method, periodization. Some writers regard musical modernism as an historical period extending from about 1890 to 1930, and apply the term postmodernism to the period after 1930. Other writers assert that modernism is not attached to any historical period, but rather is an attitude of the composer, a living construct that can evolve with the times. Jazz. According to jazz drummer and bandleader Kenny Clarke, bebop was initially referred to as modern jazz by himself and his contemporaries before it was co-opted to the name bebop by other writers. Popular music. Cultural studies professor Andrew Goodwin writes that, given the confusion of the terms, the identification of postmodern texts has ranged across an extraordinarily divergent and incoherent profusion of textual instances. Secondly, there are debates within popular music about pastiche and authenticity. Modernism means something quite different within each of these two fields. This confusion is obvious in an early formative attempt to understand rock music in postmodern terms. Goodwin argues that instances of modernism in popular music are generally not cited because it undermines the postmodern thesis of cultural fusion, in its explicit effort to preserve a bourgeois notion of art in opposition to mainstream, commercial, rock and pop. Modernism in popular music had been named as early as the late 1950s when burgeoning Los Angeles rock and roll radio station KRLA started dubbing their airspace Modern Radio Los Angeles. Author Dominic Priori believes that the concept of modernism was bound up in the very construction of the greater Los Angeles area, at a time when the city was just beginning to come into its own as an international cultural center. Some examples which soon followed include the elaborately arranged River Deep, Mountain High by Icon Amp, Tina Turner, and Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. Desiring a taste of modern avant-garde R&B for the latter's recording, group member and song co-writer Brian Wilson considered the music advanced rhythm and blues, but received criticism from his bandmates, who derided the track for being too modern during its making. Art rock and progressive rock artists such as the Velvet Underground, Henry Cow, Soft Machine, and Hatfield and the North would later exhibit modernist aspirations, although Goodwin posits that progressive rock should be considered anathema to postmodernism.